From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
It is now my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Maggie Rivas Rodriguez from the University of Texas School of Journalism. She is also the director of the United States Latino-Latina World War II Oral History Project, and she will introduce the 3 World War II veterans. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Thank you, Francisco. It's my honor today to be here at this very important occasion and to ask these 3 gentlemen some questions about the Latino experience during World War II. Our oral history project really focuses specifically on Latinos, and that includes Latinos who are not just Mexican Americans, Puerto Rican, Cuban. We also have someone who's from Chile, whose forefathers were from Chile, and one recently whose family was from Ecuador. The importance of this is that the Latino experience in this country was a little bit different from others' experiences. And unfortunately, it has not been well documented. And so the purpose and the goal of our project is to make sure that the experiences of the U.S. Latino is represented in tomorrow's history books and other books that depict the experiences of pre-World War, World War II, and post-World War America. These 3 gentlemen are here with us today, and we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to ask them kind of open-ended question. Let me just introduce them if I may, and I'm going to just read from the little biographies that we've had them. Over here on the wing chair, to my left and to your right, is Evelio Grillo. Mr. Grillo, we have interviewed for our project. He was raised in Ybor City, which is a Cuban neighborhood inside Tampa, Florida. He attended an all-black high school in Washington, D.C., and he graduated from a historically black college in New Orleans. He was part of the 823rd Engineer Aviation Battalion, which was a colored unit. Mr. Grillo served in the China-Burma-India Theater and building the Ledo Road. And he wrote about his experiences in his book, Black Cuban, Black American, which was the first that I had read about him. It's a wonderful book, and it really looks at some of the interesting racial problems that we have in our country. In the middle here is Mr. Encinias. Mr. Encinias is from New Mexico. He was 16 years old when he joined the National Guard in 1939. He was, the Guard was called to active duty, and he served as a combat engineer in the 45th Division. After Pearl Harbor, he trained to become a pilot, and he was sent to North Africa as a campaign was ending there. Mr. Encinias flew a British Spitfire in combat in 1944. He was shot down over northern Italy. As a prisoner of war, he was moved to Frankfurt, Germany. He served in the Korean War, and he was shot down in North Korea. He flew 111 missions in Korea. After the war, he was shot down. He was rescued. After the war, he taught French at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and in '62, he went to Vietnam, where he flew another 60 missions. This is a man who's a veteran of 3 wars. Amazing. After retiring in 1985, he turned to writing history, and especially the history of New Mexico. And lastly, but not leastly, Mr. Medina, who is over here. I'm sorry, I thought Mr. Medina. Mr. Medina is someone who's also from New Mexico. He was 20 years old. He served as a tail gunner on the 459th Bomb Group of the 756th Bomb Squadron. He was also shot down over northern Italy in July 1944. He's written his memoirs as well in a book called Ciao Francisco. It's a self-published memoir, and he's been nice enough to lend it to our project. We've made photocopies, and in fact, when we made photocopies, the people at the copy place got so enthralled with it that they made a copy for themselves and read it. He was hit by anti-aircraft fire, and his crew of 9 people bailed out. Everybody but Mr. Medina were captured, and he was on his own in Italy and staying in some pretty unbelievable quarters there. I read his book. And he was befriended by Italians, and they helped him link up to some partisans. He evaded capture for 8 months. In 1945, he was rescued by the Allies, and he has returned to Italy, and he went back and saw some of the people that he befriended during World War II. Our interest right now is to look at specifically what made the Latino experience a little bit different. I'm going to start out with Mr. Encinias because I personally interviewed Mr. Encinias at his home now in Albuquerque, and he talked a little bit about growing up in northern New Mexico, speaking only Spanish, and wanting to serve with other Spanish-speaking boys during World War II. Mr. Encinias, if you can tell us about that.
Okay. Good morning. Thanks for coming over. My name is Miguel Encinias, as you heard. I come from Las Vegas, not Sin City, Las Vegas, New Mexico. And that's the real Las Vegas because Vegas means meadow, and we have meadows in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and we don't have meadows in Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas, New Mexico is a very interesting town or city because it's actually two towns rather than just one. One was built by Spanish plans while it was still a province of Spain, a province of New Spain. And the other side of the town was built after the railroad came there. They are very different because Old Town is an old Spanish-style city. As I said, the plans used to come from Spain, and the new town, that's what they call it, but now they call it East Las Vegas, and that is built like any other Midwestern town with perpendicular streets. Lawns out in front, whereas in Old Town the lawns are in the back because as they do in Spain and Mexico, you know, they don't want to show off their lawns, they just want to enjoy their lawns, so it's a different philosophy. At any rate, we in Old Town spoke Spanish at home. My mother didn't speak any Spanish at all, any English at all. And my father had taught himself, he never went to school either, neither one of them had taught himself English because he became a cowboy with the Bell Ranch, the second biggest ranch after the King Ranch in Texas. And he taught himself to read and write also. And he was lucky in that he got the manager of the ranch changed, and the one that came from Ireland, so he didn't know about the prejudices and things like that, nothing like that. No, so he saw something in my dad, so he made him a foreman, and he was earning quite a bit of money then, and he started building his own ranch, and that's what he did, and he stayed with the Bell Ranch most of the time until he was recruited to run for political office, and he ran for county assessor, and he had success. He won, so he sold the ranch, which was a big mistake, which he regretted all of his life, because then after that he lost his money, and we had to leave our home in Las Vegas and go to Tucumcari, where he had built another home so that his kids could go to high school, and he was very, very adamant about our going to high school. He didn't have any education at all, and but the high school was in Newtown, and most of the people from Old Town who spoke only Spanish or very little English didn't want to go to that high school. So very few of us went to that high school because my father insisted, and I was glad too because I learned English. I would learn English also in Old Town because most of the classes were conducted in English, and sometimes, English, very accented English. At any rate, when I was a kid, they also had the movie theater in Newtown, and we could always find a dime some way or another. We look in the alleys for whiskey bottles, which we sold to the bootleggers for a dime or a nickel. We sold a couple of bottles. The movies were only a dime. Well, the reason I bring up the movies is because the movies that impressed me the most were World War I movies about aviation in World War. And so I wanted to become a pilot. But when World War II came along, you know, all my friends started to join way before Pearl Harbor. I mean, even before the war had gotten, you know, very far, and so I joined too. Once you join it wasn't hard to join the National Guard because if you were breathing, they would take you. You know, they had trouble recruiting people. Well, and consequently, we were activated or federalized. I joined in 1939. In 1940, we were in the service in 40. So we were already federalized about almost a year and a half before Pearl Harbor, and I said to myself, well, there goes my career as a fighter pilot because I was too young. You had to be 21. You had to have 2 years of college. I just graduated from high school when we were federalized, so I was resigned to stay in a combat engineer company for the rest of the war and this and that. But along comes Pearl Harbor, and they needed hundreds and hundreds of pilots, not just a few of them. So they lowered the limits to 18. And you had to take a written test and pass it, and take a physical and pass it, and you were a cadet. Well, I became a pilot, and I wasn't too sure that I was going to make it through flying school because I looked at myself, you know, and at my hands, and I saw that they were brown, and all the rest of the guys, all the cadets were you know, very white. They were most of them were Texans, you know, and at that time, you know, Texans didn't like us very much. And when I first reported to San Antonio as a cadet, and I was in uniform, of course, I wanted to go to a movie, so they ushered me up to the balcony because you know, there was no mixed audiences at that time. At any rate, and then I was afraid I would make it through flying school because when I first met my civilian instructor, he was blonde, blue-eyed, almost platinum blonde. I said, boy, this guy will never pass me, you know. But I made a mistake because he had come from Finland when he was 14 years old, and he also didn't know prejudice, as the manager of the bell ranch had known, and gave my father a break. So he actually gave me a break because I got sick the first time I flew. And he said, don't worry, I'll have this airplane washed out, and don't tell anybody. So I didn't tell anybody. The second time was okay, so I went through flight school, and then
Mr. Encinias.
I went overseas as a P-39 pilot, and I went to North Africa, through Trinidad, Brazil, Dakar, the desert, and ended up in Casablanca. And the P-39 was a very bad airplane. The balance was unbalanced because they had a 37 millimeter cannon in the nose, and it had the engine in the rear. It followed into a spin, wouldn't come out. We were killing a lot of pilots, so they grounded every P-39 all over the world, and they gave us a choice among the Spitfire, the P-40, and the P-38.
Mr. Encinias.
I chose the Spitfire because of the you know, Britain fame, the fame that it acquired defending Britain. And I flew for 9 months. I flew 60 missions. I was shot down, and I became a prisoner. And then once again, I said to myself, well, I know about those concentration camps. I wonder if I'm going to end up in one. And when I got, because after I was captured, they sent me to Frankfurt, Germany, for the interrogation center. And I was in a cell with a navigator and a pilot. Well, not with a pilot, but with a navigator who was in a night fighter. And I met him in a holding prison that they had in Verona, Italy. And I met him in the bathroom. He was blonde, blue-eyed guy, American, and he was also in my cell at the interrogation center. And the guard came in one day and asked him, "What's his name? What's his name?" And in a German accent, of course. And the guy said, "I don't know. Why don't you ask him?" And he tried again, "What's his name?" And then he said, "You are forcing me to talk to him." He didn't want to talk to him because I was an Aryan, you know. And I said, "What the hell is going to happen to me when I get to the prison camp? You know, is it going to be a concentration camp?" Luckily, the prison camp was run by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. And they treated us pretty well as far as no abuse and things like that. We were cold and hungry because we were on the Baltic coast, but you know, everything was okay except, as I said, we didn't have enough big enough diet. We didn't have enough calories, and so it was very cold for us and hunger. And then we were liberated by the Russian army, and that was it. Except that we didn't wait for the airplanes to pick us up.
Mr. Encinias, excuse me, could I interrupt you? Could I get Mr. Medina to talk a little bit about growing up and what his experience was
Okay.
too? Thank you very much. I think do you have a, okay. Mr. Medina has a map that he'd like to show us.
Oh, we got it. I'm Frank Medina, and I was 20 years old when I was shot down over northern Italy. This was in July of 1944. Our base was down here around Cerinola in southern Italy. We used to fly over the Adriatic Sea to stay away from land. We knew that the Germans didn't have ack-ack in the water. So we'd fly up and then we'd fly into our target and try to come out where we knew installations of flak were, but the Germans had some mobile flak guns, and the flak guns was what got to us. We were up at 16,000 after we had dropped our bombs, and on a return trip, and the reason I know that we were at 16,000, the tail gunner didn't have something telling him how high we were. I was hungry, and we used to carry Spam sandwiches and black coffee. And so I said to the co-pilot on the intercom, I asked him, "How high are we?" And he said, 16,000. And no sooner did he get those words out when the flak started breaking around us. So that's why I know we were at 16,000 when we got hit. Now, this was, like I said, I believe in August of 44, August the 28th. It was my 18th mission, and as we all bailed out, I counted 5 chutes in front of me, and then I looked back, I saw 3 chutes, and then I saw the airplane going away, and all of a sudden it blew up. So nothing but scrap went down to the Germans. And then when we came down, I saw the first man hit the ground, and you really hit the ground when you come down in those parachutes. I saw him, and he was captured right away. And then the next one gets captured, and then I took my attention away from them to the guy right in front of me. He came down by a road, and they picked him up. I landed in a cornfield, and the corn was about this high. See, and I was 5'8", 120 pounds. So they had always told us, if you bail out, pull in your chute, stuff it down, take everything off and take off running. It's exactly what I did, because I had a bunny suit, and that was an electrical suit that we wore, because the planes were not heated. So we had these electrical suits on us, and I took that off and stuffed it with the parachute and everything else that I could think of. I took off running through a field into another field, and I came up to an irrigation canal. I said, uh-oh, the Po Valley of Italy is pretty flat, and the Po River is down here. The Adige River comes around like this, and I landed between both rivers. But there were these irrigation canals, and I thought, well, I can't try to swim across that because they're going to catch me. And so I ran back in and hid in a ravine. I'll show you. I can get pretty small when I get down like this, and I pull my chute over my beautiful black hair. I tell you, I had it, and so I zipped the suit, and I kept watching, and I heard the bullets because they strafed the field, and then I waited a while, and heard some rustling. The man walked right by me and stood right here, about where that cap is. And I'm here looking at him. By the way, I'm having a good communication with the big man upstairs to help me. And I waited, and he had his gun, and he looked around, and he didn't see me. The grass was tall, and I had a green suit on. So I waited, then he left, and then I sat down and relaxed. That night, I walked out of the cornfield about 10 o'clock. I got again to that canal. I didn't want to cross the bridge. I figured they may have a guard on it. So I stripped and dog paddle, made bundles of my clothing and everything, and put it in my mouth and dropped them over there, and came back and 3 times to get across, then dried off, got dressed, and started walking down a dirt road. And I tell you, those big old houses that they have really scared me. I was born and raised in Texas, and the country folks don't have big houses like this. These were enormous houses, and everything
Medina,
looked enormous.
let me interrupt you. How much, because I know that from reading your book, that you spoke Spanish to these Italians, and you were able, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, we're getting there real fast.
Okay. We just have a limited amount of time, and I want to give Mr. Grillo enough time to talk
the
too.
thing was that I spent a night alone in the cornfield and spent a day and got hungrier and thirstier. And at night I walked through a village, and I asked some kids that were playing, where's Padova? Because that was my target, to go to Padova and then to Trieste in Yugoslavia. And while I was standing there talking to these kids, 2 men in uniform come out and face me. And they say, Americani. Boom, boom, boom. I says, yes, I'm an American. And they smiled when they did that, and I said, thank you. But I says, they knew what I meant. And so I noticed then when I said agua, Spanish for water.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.